Everyone. Hello, everyone. This is going to be a reading of the book Balloons Over Broadway, The True Story of the Puppeteer of Macy's Parade. It's by Melissa Sweet, written and illustrated by Melissa Sweet. While I read this book, I will be reading all the little scraps of writing that are embedded throughout the illustrations. And sometimes they're long excerpts of writing. I just want to give the full experience of the book. The illustrator is very good at using collage as part of her art. I mean, her art is collage. And sometimes that includes scraps of paper, but they're very important to the story. So just be patient. I have no idea how long this reading will take, but this is a biography of a real person who lived. And the first page is end papers that are made up of this collage, and it's an excerpt from a book, and it says, The Tony Sarg Marionette Book. Marionette is a stringed puppet. The toy collection and what came of it. Tony Sarg had long been collecting toys. All his spare money went for toys that were curious or quaint or interesting for one reason or another. Collecting toys is still one of his beloved hobbies. He told the author with glowing eyes that his collection, he believes, is now larger than that at the Kensington Museum in London. His passion for collecting toys is natural enough, for Tony Sarg's grandmother also collected toys and bequeathed him her collection along with her ability with the brush and pencil. Collecting in turn led Mr. Sarg to read all the books on toys which he could find. One of these books, by Dorothy Neville, laments the decay of the marionette stage. A phrase caught and fired his imagination. Would that an artist, an enthusiast, would revive this ancient art of the theater? Why should I not be that artist? Tony Sarg asked himself. In his toy collection, he had many ancient marionettes from various countries, and he proceeded to study them. True marionettes are those manipulated from above by means of wires or strings, which give life and motion to the figures as they are handled by the operator or puppeteer. And here's the cover page, and you can see the collage of different bits of art. And here's a picture of Anthony Tony Frederick Sarg. He was born in 1880 and he died in 1942. Every little movement has a meaning of its own. And that is a quote by Tony Sarg. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarg loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? He rigged some pulleys and ran a rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. That night he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope, and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens ate their breakfast, and Tony stayed snug in his bed. And his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. So if you look at the question, it said the steps. Step 1 is to spread the feed the night before. Step 2 is to pull the rope. Step 3, the door opens. Step 4, the chickens come out and eat their feed. Very clever. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and strings, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out how to make his marionettes' movements so lifelike they performed as if they were real actors. Word spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. When Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Sarg marionettes began performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters and then attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. And this is an example of, I guess, his notebook or something. It's kind of cool. It says cut wood, cloth, wire, sew costumes for puppets, build backdrops, Humpty Dumpty's wall, Granny's house, Jack Horner's corner, and then he's got a list of the colors he uses, and he has a shirt pattern for Humpty Dumpty and a little scrap of fabric. It says use this fabric, and a picture of the buttons. So it was like his work notebook. And that was from November 1923. In Macy's Wondertown windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long they performed to shoppers jostling for a better look. But Tony had an even bigger job in store for, but Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants, and as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy's agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day, 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Each year the parade grew, but when Macy's brought in lions and tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Yeah. Macy's asked Tony to replace the animals. Tony, can you think of something spectacular? Okay, he said. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order to make them be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down the streets? Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how would Tony make his big puppets move? And then Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. So here's a picture. It says blimp, Goodyear, construct using simple shapes glued together. Decorative legs will be made from fabric and attached last. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the street avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. But now the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground, and though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate, to move and gesture, more like puppets. But how? With a marionette, the controls are above and the puppet hangs down. But what if the controls below were below and the puppet could rise up? During the next year, Tony set his new idea in motion. This time he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of rubberized silk. Strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. More important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not just with air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. Tony didn't know if everything would go as planned. What if the balloons are filled with too much helium? What if one of them hits a sharp object like a bus stop sign? Will they fit under the L train, the elevated train track? Ooh. It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down with sandbags. One by one, the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then, one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. Let's have a parade! Oh boy, I wish I could share this with you. Let me see if I can flip it. Whoops. I tried to flip it, but it didn't work. I'll just continue reading. And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose up to the skies. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sailed down Broadway and shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New Yorkers would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York City to see what new balloons would rise to the skies for Macy's famous parade. Tony Sarg, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it to be. And that is the end. The author note at the end I will read to you as well. Tony's daughter, Mary, once remarked, quite simply, Tony Sarg just never grew up. When he began making puppets, he relied on his childhood love of tinkering and figuring out how things worked. He taught himself how to carve wood, build sets, sew costumes, engineer electronics, and write plays. He had a keen attention to detail and made innovations to performing puppetry, elevating it to an art form that had not been seen before. Many consider Tony Sarg to be the father of American puppetry. But Tony could not have accomplished all he did without his talented apprentices, some of whom went on to their own fame. One of his apprentices, Bill Baird, later created the puppets for the Lonely Goatherd marionette show featured in the movie The Sound of Music. And one of Baird's apprentices was Jim Henson, who invented the Muppets. Even with no formal art lesson, Tony became one of the busiest artists of his day. But whether he was illustrating his children's books, designing toys, creating animations, or managing his marionette troupe as it crisscrossed the country, Tony still made time for children. They were his favorite audience. He responded to every letter he received, one of which was simply addressed Tony Sarg, New York. And that is the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed that book. I said I would read all the end papers, but I'm actually not going to because this is way too long. But this is the original advertisement from New York Times in 1933. So that was when he first started doing those helium puppets. And that's the end. That's the end of the book. I hope you enjoyed it.